my study today is on what was the original diet in the Garden of Eden before Adam and Eve sinned. Well, in order to do this, it's good to go through the creation account right away and find out the different things that happened and what God actually made. So if we go to the third day on the creation account, which is Genesis 1 verse 11, we find the things that God made in the plant world. In Genesis 1, 11 and 12 it says, "And God said, Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the face of the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good." So here is interesting. We see grasses, which are our grains today, which was something that was made at that time. And then we see fruit trees, which we all know, the seed within itself. And then we see something interesting, which is kind of ambiguous, and or mysterious, is a herb yielding seed. It doesn't quite specifically let us know what this herb yielding seed is. So as we go further through the creation account, maybe this will give us a little bit of light as to what this herb yielding seed is. So if we go to Genesis 1, 29 and 30, it's going to tell us what man is able to eat and what the animals are able to eat. So in 129 it says, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." So we see that fruit was meat for man, and meat just means food. And we see the herb yielding seed was for food. Now let's go to verse 30, and it's going to tell us what animals are able to eat. And it says, "To every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein is the life, I have given you every green herb for meat." And it was so. Now that's kind of interesting, because now all of a sudden it doesn't say grass as we've seen before, but it says, "I have given you every green herb for meat." Now when we go to the verse above that, it didn't say man could eat the green herbs, but the animals were to eat the green herbs. So all of a sudden we see something neat, that this herb, one has seed within itself, but this green herb must also include grasses, because we've seen grasses in the beginning, which are a lot of our grains, and it's grasses. So everybody can identify that wheat is a grass. People eat wheatgrass, but that was not something that was given to us in the beginning. So it says we could eat herb yielding seed and from fruit trees. So if we think about this herb, this green herb, and we think about animals that come into our gardens and eat some of our foods that are in our gardens, if you have lettuce, or if you have kale or spinach, or pretty much most things in our garden, the deer will eat. They'll even eat tomato plants and stuff like that. But we've cultivated a lot of vegetables today, which people would consider a tomato a vegetable, but originally it was a fruit, and it is a tree. And I don't know if any animals would eat, besides some of the leaves, on those tomatoes that are natural. But I think that they eat a lot of the things that we've taken the natural, we've cultivated them into such a way that they're not recognizable as their original species, and then they'll eat that. So there's some interesting things that kind of go along in there, because sometimes deer will come in and they'll eat a tomato plant right off. But a tomato plant is not a tomato plant that God made. It's something that we made, and it's definitely inferior to what God made. So if we think about this herb yielding seed and this fruit tree that yields seed, now we should be able to look to see, is there another verse that God tells us what we can eat? And there is. In Genesis 2:15 it says, or 15 to 17 it says, "And the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. And the Lord commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest of it thou shalt surely die." So here the Bible says of every tree you can eat. It didn't say you could eat any of these herbs and stuff that the animals are eating per se. It's saying every tree. So that may what we really need to identify is to trace our words through the Bible again and find out what is actually a tree in the Bible. Because sometimes we just think tree and we think, here we have a tree. But the Bible is going to identify two other things that are trees in the Bible. The first one that we find that is a tree that we often would recognize as a tree but forget that is a tree, we find in Ezekiel 15 verse 2. It says, "Son of man, what is the vine tree any more than any tree, or the branch which is among the trees of the forest?" So we know that, I think people will recognize that a vine is a tree because often we're considered, Jesus will say, "I am the vine, you are the branches," right? Kind of, I'm paraphrasing really badly here because I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it'll talk about, that we're grafted into it. And when we're grafted into it, we don't need to produce wild grapes, but we'll produce tame grapes. I think that's how it goes. I could be very wrong, but it's good for you to do the study yourself and figure it all out. And I'll probably look at it after this. But anyways, it clearly distinguishes that a vine is a tree. Now, let's go to Matthew 13, verse 31. And it says, "Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. And indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is among the greatest among the herbs, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof." So all of a sudden here we see that a herb becomes a large tree that the birds can lodge in the branches. So today, we don't know what this mustard tree is. It might be extinct, it might not be extinct, but what other trees that produce, we know trees produce fruit that we can eat, but what other trees produce something that we can eat? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. It's nut trees. And even so, they're varying in sizes. There's different sizes. There's different sizes of fruit trees, there's different sizes of nut trees. And I want to talk specifically about, let's just say, a cashew tree. So who knows, maybe a cashew tree was this mustard tree, because mustard is an irritant, right? Like if you put it on your skin, it heats up your skin, and if you eat it, it burns the insides of you, it fevers your blood, and it's very unhealthy for you to eat mustard. So likewise with the cashew, the seed is in the nut. It has a hard shell, but the seed is in uracilic acid, I believe is what it's called. It's the same thing as poison ivy. And if you don't extract the nut properly, usually you have to throw it in a fire. It burns up all the oil that's in it, that acid that's in it, and then you can extract the nut. They have other ways of doing it, I suppose, and that way you can have raw nuts. But in general, that's how people get cashews, is they burn off all that stuff. But that, and I'll show a picture of it, is a nut that's on the outside of a fruit, which is really interesting. So if we think about strawberries don't have a seed within themselves. Well, they're kind of inside the fruit, but they're also on the outside of the fruit, the same as a cashew. So I think a lot of these berries, well, not a lot of these berries, but you have a strawberry, could be considered maybe a herb bearing seed, which also has a fruit. And if you think about a lot of the, say, walnuts, even when you get them, they look almost like little limes, and you can smell them. They're very aromatic, and they're nice. They can be nice smelling. So if we think about in the Garden of Eden, there was no death there. So we didn't kill any plants to eat them, right? So we weren't digging up roots and, say, a carrot. And I know a lot of people say you can cut off the carrot top and replant the carrot top and you can eat the bottom of it. But that whole plant is actually edible. But with the tree, the whole plant is not edible. With all the trees, not everything is edible on it. So fruits and nuts, even if we just think about it as something innate in us, I'm not sure if innate's the proper word, but instinctually are more food for us. So whenever the fruit falls from the tree or the nuts fall from the tree, we know they're ripe at that time. And we can pick them up, we can smell them, they're aromatic, they look good, they smell good, they taste good, they digest well in us. The nuts, I have to figure that out. They're slower digesting. They don't digest as easily as the fruit. You have to eat a much smaller quantity of them. And I don't know if you should be eating them alone or with other things. But if you think about it instinctually, if you look at kale growing in the garden, it doesn't make your mouth water. It doesn't make you go, oh, I really, really want to have that. Usually, if you pick a kale leaf, you're like, oh, I can put this in a salad, or I can put lemon juice on it, or I can do something with it. The only vegetable that you really have that people really might crave is, say, maybe a radish or a carrot, mostly a carrot, where people might want to eat raw in their natural state. But when it comes to fruits and nuts, in their natural state, when ripe, everybody, uh, now not everybody likes the same fruit, because some people just love durian. And yes, it's very aromatic and it'll tell you when it's ripe, but not everybody will enjoy the taste of durian, but some people just thrive on the taste of durian. I've learned, eat small portions first, get used to it, because if you eat too much of one fruit at one time, sometimes, especially if you like it. I did that with soursop when we lived in Grenada, and I just like, oh, the soursop's awesome, and I eat all kinds of soursop, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I ate too much soursop, I did it all too fast, especially when it's a new fruit. And my family became tired of it. And then I kind of became tired of it, because I buy it sometimes and then they didn't want to eat it. They would rather have the mangoes or bananas or guava or whatever. Um, but instinctually, fruit and nuts are things that we want, that we kind of crave. And that's something that people will often do too, is like, I often think about a fruit test. If somebody says, oh, I'm hungry, I'd like, can I have a piece of, especially kids or whatever, can I have a piece of cake, or can I make myself some toast, or can I do any of those things? And because I'm so hungry, and you say, no, have an apple. And they're like, oh, I'll just go without. Well, they're not hungry when. If they're really hungry, they'd be like, yes, I would have that apple. So a lot of times we eat for tastes that have been perverted, is probably the best way to say it. They're not natural tastes anymore, where we have to do different things with it. But when God made us and he put us in the Garden of Eden, we had fruit, we have nuts, and we would have ate it in its most natural form, because that gives the body the best health that it can have. So as we went through this study, we see that the trees are what the fruit that man can have, right? Which would include like a strawberry, or it include raspberries, or it would go right up, because they're all small. And some people might say, well, how is a strawberry a tree? Well, it has a woody stalk. It lives for over 3 years, or around 3 years, and that makes it kind of a perennial. What it would have been like in Eden, it would never have died. So from what we can see, all the things that So from what we can see, the original diet for man in Eden really appears, by tracing our words through the Bible, to be fruits that come from trees, whether it is nuts or actual fruit. And sometimes, like in the cashew or the strawberry, you have the seed on the outside, and then there's still a fruit that you can eat. So some people might ask the question, well, when did vegetables become food for man? We find that in Genesis 3:18, where it says, thorns also and thistles shall I bring forth unto thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. This was after Adam and Eve had eaten from the forbidden fruit, and this was part of their punishment, that they were now to eat vegetables. Many kids would think likewise today. So it's my prayer that this study might have been a blessing for people. For myself, I'm going to the diet that God created in the Garden of Eden, as I do believe that the food that God made for us is what's best for us and our health. Now, if some people wonder why God gave us vegetables and why God gave us meat, I have another video on this, and it's called What the Bible Teaches About Clean and Unclean Meats. And in this video, I tell you why I believe vegetables were added to the diet after man sinned. And it wasn't due to the plants not giving us enough nutrition. Because we see that the curse of Cain was, and which was afterwards, that the ground no longer yielded up its strength. Anyways, if they speak not according to the law and the testimony, there's no light in it, and obviously it has to be due to the law. And the Bible tells us from the law why vegetables were given to man. Check out my video. It'll be in the description below.